Welcome to Surrovod. I'm Glenn Paul. I'm in Karratha in Western Australia's Pilbara region, where a group of CSIRO scientists are working to establish whether air emissions being released by local industry are having an impact on ancient Aboriginal rock art that's been here for many thousands of years. Dolphin Island is among a number of small islands that make up the Burrup Peninsula, and one of two the CSIRO is monitoring on behalf of the Burrup Rock Art Monitoring Management Committee, a group commissioned by the Western Australia Department of State Development to investigate the possible adverse impacts of industrial emissions on the rock art. The ancient Aboriginal rock art in this area are not paintings but rather petroglyphs, images that have been created by chipping or engraving into the surface-weathered coat of the boulders that characterise the Burrup. These petroglyphs have cultural significance for the local Indigenous people, as well as being archaeologically important at a national and international level. To get out to Dolphin Island, we hitched a ride with local rangers from the Western Australia Department of Environment and Conservation, who picked us up on a dinghy to rendezvous with the larger Ranger vessel out in the peninsula.
Get your shoes off.
With the size of our team and the amount of equipment we carried, this would require more than one trip. After a short run, we sighted the Ranger vessel and soon were alongside. Once on board and with the dinghy secured, I spoke to the skipper, Rob Connell, about the trip out. Today we'd be visiting two islands, firstly Dolphin Island and then the smaller Gidley Island. With a run up the peninsula, we eventually sighted Dolphin Island, and with nowhere to land the larger vessel, the dinghy would again be used to transport us to and from the island. I took the second trip out, and with a wave from the skipper, we were on our way. The forward team were waiting on the beach, and now with the sun well up, it was time for the long trek to the rock art site that had been tested 12 months earlier, and it was there that they determined if there had been any changes to the rock art. It was a fair slog over the rough terrain, but it was worth it when the first of many petroglyphs appeared. After a further hike, we reached the main site of interest and the scientists began taking their measurements. In amongst the hive of activity, I asked Dr. Eric Ramanadu about his role.
We're using a method called reflectance spectroscopy, and basically the way it works is you got the light source. We have a small light source that we're shining on the rock, and we're analyzing the reflected light. And based on the spectrum from this reflected light, we can tell which kind of minerals you have there. Based on the last 5 years study, so far everything is pretty much the way it should be.
With all the necessary measurements taken, we packed up our gear and headed back down through the scrub towards the beach, where the dinghy would be waiting to take us over to another rock art site on Gidley Island. As we approached Gidley Island, I was told that it wasn't uncommon to see dolphins and whales in these waters, but today, unfortunately, there didn't seem to be any around. After we disembarked and the boat took off to collect the rest of the party, a sea turtle did pop his head up to see what we were up to. Then it was time for another leisurely stroll over rocks and scrub to the next designated testing site of the rock art. Deborah Lau from CSIRO Materials Science and Engineering was measuring any differences in colour on the rock art since the last visit using a portable spectrophotometer. I asked her about this instrument.
So what the instrument does is use light to irradiate the sample, so it shines some light on the sample and it measures the reflected light that comes back. Now, if you shined different types of light on the sample, you'd get different types of light coming back. And so this has a standard spectrum, and because we use the same spectrum every time and it's coming in from the same angle every time, when we come back each year, it gives us comparative measurements.
It was getting towards the end of the day, and with the change in tide, the dinghy could no longer access the island where we'd been dropped off, so it was necessary to walk across the island to a beach over on the other side. Most seemed pleased to see the dinghy. As picturesque as the scenery was, it had been a long day of walking, working, sweating and getting jabbed by sharp spinifex grass. So with the testing of the petroglyphs on both islands complete, we headed back out to our ride and back to Karratha. The next morning, we headed out to the first of a number of sites of rock art not far from Karratha on the Burrup Peninsula. Karratha is home to industry that includes iron ore operations, sea salt mining, ammonia export operations and the North West Shelf Natural Gas Project. With so many possible sources of emissions, if it was having an impact on the rock art, it would be at one of these sites. After some off-road driving, we came to the first site of the day, and it was interesting to note the wildlife that made these rocky outcrops home. And so began another full day of testing the rock art for any indication of industrial emissions, such as dust from iron ore as it's transported and loaded onto ships, or emissions from other nearby industry. To assist in the overall assessment of this, atmospheric monitoring stations have been placed in close proximity of the petroglyphs. I asked Deborah how the previous day's testing related to what was being undertaken at these more local rock art sites.
We're here today to do some more colour measurements and some more measurements of the mineralogy on the rock surface. And what we do is take some measurements down here near where industry is and compare those measurements to the ones that we took yesterday, which are up away from industry. Because there's natural weathering processes that happen as part of the way that rocks degrade naturally. And if we see any changes in the measurement here, we won't know whether it's attributable to industry or whether it's attributable to natural weathering processes unless we have some control measurements, which are the ones we took yesterday. The way the sites were chosen were that they were sort of a similar distance from the coast to the sites here and similar aspect to the weather and the prevailing winds and the rains and cyclones, so that we would be able to directly compare sites that were affected or believed to be affected by industry to those that we know are far away from industry and can't potentially be affected by them.
Well, it's been quite a journey in what is a very spectacular part of the world. As for the Burrup rock art, well, so far so good under the watchful eye of the CSIRO science team. If you'd like to follow the ongoing study, you can do that by visiting our website. It's www.csiro.au.